In the mid-19th century, the prevailing view of our Earth's past was held by catastrophists, who assumed the oceans revolting over the landscape from the flood of Noah caused the littering of giant rocks, sediment, and fossils along the way. During this time, a Swiss naturalist by the name of Louis Agassiz sat on the edge of an alpine glacier for weeks on end to observe the daily movement of ice, and here the theory of the Ice Age was born. The Alps showed clear signs of glacial movement, as ice drift and moraines can be found about, although Agassiz himself regarded the onset and demise of his Ice Age theory as a catastrophic event. In ridding sciences of religious dogma, the flood was replaced with the movement of ice from the poles down to Switzerland, Europe, and beyond. In 1840 he wrote, "The surface of Europe, previously adorned with tropical vegetation and populated by herds of huge elephants, enormous hippopotami, and gigantic carnivora, was suddenly buried under a vast mantle of ice covering plains, lakes, seas, and plateaus. Upon the life and movement of a vigorous creation fell the silence of death. Springs vanished, rivers ceased flowing, the rays of the sun rising up this frozen shore encountered only the breath of winter from the north and the thunder of crevasses as they opened up across the surface of this icy sea." Agassiz's theory of ice soon won the support of Charles Lyell, the founder of geology and the modern scientific doctrine of uniformity, which states, "All activities that are in action today have always been so in the past. The slow process of erosion on ocean shores to the ever drawn-out ascent of mountains." Lyell would end up writing the definitive book on geology and ice called Principles of Geology, which was a plea to replace catastrophism with gradualism. Throughout this time period, much of Europe was in social upheaval as scientific materialism began to replace the mysticism and religious beliefs that held supreme with its notions of cataclysm and the flood of Noah. In a time of turbulence and strife, many naturalists sought order in the chaos that reigned within the French Revolution, and as such, all questions of a catastrophic past were to be replaced with a placid, non-chaotic narrative. The theory of the Ice Age, seeing polished and ice-carved surfaces around the globe, was born out of chaos. Lyell agreed to Agassiz's theory, but had to rid of the cataclysmic nature of it. H. F. Osborne, a proponent of Lyell's uniformitarian view, wrote, "Present continuity implies the improbability of past catastrophism and violence of change, either in the lifeless or in the living world. Moreover, we seek to interpret the changes in laws of the past times through those we observe at the present time." Though Lyell's work was to rid of the catastrophist view that geologists held prior to him, his own research led him to many unsolved puzzles that he assumed would be resolved later. It did not matter because our geological past was as tranquil and uneventful as the present. In his Observations and Failings, Lyell writes, "It has been truly observed that when we arrange the known fossil formations in chronological order, they constitute a broken and defective series. We pass, without any intermediate gradations, from systems of strata which are horizontal to other systems which are highly inclined, from rocks of peculiar mineral composition to others which have a character wholly distinct, from one assemblage of organic remains to another in which frequently nearly all the species and a large part of the genera are different. These violations of continuity, or uniformity, are so common as to constitute in most regions the rule rather than the exception, and they have been considered by many geologists as conclusive in favor of sudden revolutions in the inanimate and animate world." Because he could not explain the geological record, which to other geologists before him bore signs of cataclysmic upheaval, Lyell turned to social analogies. In one instance, he begged his followers to imagine a census is taken every year in 60 different provinces. The population would appear to gradually increase. But if the population was taken every year in only one province, then 59 years later, the next study at the first province would seemingly show a spike in a population. Based on this argument, the theory of uniformity or gradual changes of our Earth's surface was cemented. Lyell says, "For this reason, all theories are rejected which involve the assumption of sudden and violent catastrophes and revolutions of the whole Earth and its inhabitants. theories which are restrained by no reference to existing analogies and in which a desire is manifested to cut rather than patiently to untie the Gordian knot. And there it is. Because modern civilizations have no point of reference, it ought not to be true. Taking Agassi's newly formed continental ice theory along with the fossil record, Lyell said, "The geologists may freely speculate on a time when herds of hippopotami issued from North African rivers such as the Nile and swam northward in the summer along coasts of the Mediterranean, or even occasionally visited near the shore. Here and there they may have landed to graze or browse, tarrying a while, and afterwards continuing their course northward. Others may have swum in a few summer days from rivers in the south of Spain or France to Thames or Wales in England, making timely retreat to the south before the snow and ice set in." Notice the peaceful and uneventful rhetoric used in this assumption. Also notice how this is, again, a direct contradiction to his own theory of uniformity, as we do not see this today. This is a fictional narrative, not a fact. The only hippos you find north of Africa are caged in zoos. Greenland is the largest island in the world and an example of what people think the Ice Age looked like. Almost 90% of its land is covered in massive thick sheets of ice, some up to 6,000 feet in depth. However, Greenland is not the North Pole. The North Pole resides over the Arctic Ocean. One need only look at a map of the Earth to see the mystery that encompasses Greenland. Why is this massive island stuck in the Ice Age? What about northern Siberia, which was never glaciated? How is this possible? What about Alaska and the islands surrounding the Arctic Ocean? Why are they not covered in thousands of feet of ice? Velikovsky writes, "Bones of Greenland reindeer have been found in southern New Jersey and southern France, and bones of Lapland reindeer in the Crimea. This was explained as due to the invasion of ice and the retreat of northern animals to the south. The hippopotamus was found in France and England, and the lion in the Alaskan mucks. To explain similar occurrences, an interglacial period was introduced into the scheme. The land was warmed up and the southern animals visited the northern latitudes. And since the change from one fauna to another took place repeatedly, 4 glacial periods with 3 interglacial were generally counted, though the number of periods is not consistent with all lands or with all investigators. That why the polar lands were not glaciated during the Ice Age was never explained. Greenland presents still another enigma in the preceding formations, those of the Tertiary Age. Plant remains in the northernmost parts of Greenland have been found like magnolia and fig trees. Forests of exotic trees and groves of juicy subtropical plants grew in this land that lies deep in the cold Arctic and is immersed yearly in a continuous polar night of 6 months. In Ellesmere, which sits next to northern Greenland, has been discovered a fossilized forest on a small island with nothing but ice and rock. On the northern point of Spitzenberg, a 30-foot deep coal bed was discovered, which can only suggest that massive forests once thrived there. Large formations of coral have also been discovered on Spitzenberg, and corals only grow in the hot tropical regions of Earth. How could massive forests and corals grow in a cold area that sees 6 months of night a year? Marine fossils have also been discovered in the prairies of Manitoba, Canada, along with turtles and lizards in Alberta. Dolphin fossils have been discovered in South Carolina. Marine fossils were discovered in New Jersey. A fossil of a giant squid has been discovered in the jungles of Peru. A monumental grave of maritime deposits has been unearthed in China. Massive coal deposits have been discovered in Antarctica. Trees that are found in places like New Zealand once littered the landscape. Antarctica was once tropical. Scientists believe that summer temperatures reached around 27 degrees Celsius in a place that has 6 months of darkness a year. In Alaska, mammoth tusks and elephant have been discovered buried in the thick muck, which is reached using giant drills to dig through the frozen mud. It contains enormous numbers of frozen bones of extinct animals such as the mammoth, mastodon, superbison, and horse. Under what conditions did this great slaughter take place in which millions upon millions of animals were torn limb from limb and mingled with uprooted trees? Professor F.C. Hibben wrote, "Although the formation of the deposits of muck is not clear, there is ample evidence that at least portions of this material were deposited under catastrophic conditions. Mammal remains are for the most part dismembered and disarticulated, even though some fragments yet retain in their frozen state portions of ligament, skin, hair, and flesh. Twisted and torn trees are piled and splintered in masses. At least 4 considerable layers of volcanic ash may be traced in these deposits, although they are extremely warped and distorted. At various levels of muck, stone artifacts were found frozen in situ at great depths in an apparent association with the Ice Age fauna, which implies that men were contemporary with extinct animals in Alaska. All around the world we find massive amounts of animals heaved into piles, frozen in muck or trapped in caves covered by sediment and sludge. We find the Ice Age sheets covered tropical regions, and the northern regions were once tropical. Lions in England and elephants in Alaska. Under the uniformitarian view, the current poles have always existed in the age of mankind, and it was simply the ice that stretched from the poles. Yet, this does not and cannot explain the global massive die-offs that occurred in what is termed the end of the Ice Age. Why would animals die en masse when their habitat became a better place to live? Would they not collectively perish at the beginning of the Ice Age, when the bitter cold swept the land? What can explain the apparent catastrophic nature of their demise? The ice-polished land of the world exists not because the ice stretched down from the poles, but because those areas were once in the North and South Pole positions. This is the only explanation that can unify these mysteries. This was no extraordinary extinction of a vague geological period which fizzled to an uncertain end. This death was catastrophic and all-inclusive. What caused the death of 40 million animals, the corpus delicti in this mystery, may be found almost everywhere. Their bones lie bleaching in the sands of Florida and the gravels of New Jersey. They weather out of the dry terraces of Texas and protrude from the sticky ooze of the tar pits off Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. The bodies of the victims are everywhere. We find literally thousands together, young and old, fowl and dam, calf and cow. The muck pits of Alaska are filled with evidence of universal death, a picture of quick extinction. Mammoth and bison were torn and twisted as though by a cosmic hand in a godly rage. In many places, the Alaskan muck blanket is packed with animal bones and debris in trainloads. Mammoth, mastodon, bison, horses, wolves, bears, and lions. A faunal population in the middle of some cataclysmic catastrophe was suddenly frozen in a grim charade. Any good solution to a consuming mystery must answer all of the facts. Velikovsky writes, "A true theory of the origin of the ice ages, whether resorting to astronomical, geological, or atmospheric causes, must also explain why ice ages did not occur in northeastern Siberia, the coldest place on Earth, but did occur in temperate latitudes and in a much more remote past India, Madagascar, and equatorial Brazil." None of the theories mentioned explains these strange facts. Hypotheses concerning warmer and colder areas in space or the variability of the sun as a source of energy are especially inadequate to account for the geographical distribution of the ice cover. Thus, the concept of ice ages, which is established in science as one of its most definite facts, serving also as a foundation for the theory of evolution, has no explanation itself. All other theories of the origin of the Ice Age having failed, there remained an avenue of approach which already early in the discussion was chosen by several geologists, a shift of the terrestrial poles. If for some reason the poles had moved from their original positions, older polar ice would have moved out of the Arctic and Antarctic circles into new regions. The glacial cover of the Ice Age could have been the polar ice cap of an earlier epoch. Thus would explain not only the origin of the ice cover, but also the fact that its geographical position did not coincide with the present polar circles. Want to know why Greenland is so heavily covered in ice compared to other land masses surrounding it within the Arctic Circle? Greenland was the last North Pole and has since been dragged over 2,000 kilometers southward when the Earth's crust last shifted. When we see ice-carved landscapes around the world, it is not because the ice slowly stretched from the poles to the equator, annihilating wildlife in its retreat. It is because those regions were once the poles, and in a sudden shifting of the Earth's crust, continents are dragged into new locations. The ocean, remaining stationary, caused massive tsunami-like waves roaring inland and over hills, tossing trees and animals about. When the water receded, ocean sediment covered low-lying areas, preserving its destruction in fossil beds, thick layers of muck, and funneled into caverns and caves. What was once the ocean bed became dry land, and what was once dry land is swept under the sea. This paradigm offers one single explanation for our cataclysmic past, a shifting of the terrestrial poles. If this is true, then the Ice Age is a misnomer, and it never existed.